Il me fait plaisir de vous souhaiter la plus cordiale bienvenue en nos murs ce soir pour cette édition vraiment toute spéciale des Instantanés d'architecture. Mais tout d'abord, permettez-moi de me présenter. Je m'appelle Mélanie Lanouette et je suis directrice du service de la recherche ici au musée de la civilisation. Je vous disais, édition toute spéciale, d'une part parce que l'assistance est vraiment impressionnante, vous êtes très nombreux et on vous en remercie, mais aussi parce que cette édition des Instantanés s'inscrit dans le cadre des festivités du 25e anniversaire du musée de la civilisation. Et quoi de mieux en cette occasion que d'avoir avec nous ce soir l'architecte concepteur du musée, Monsieur Moshe Safdie, ainsi que d'autres experts qui ont généreusement accepté de venir réfléchir avec nous ce soir à l'architecture des musées, mais aussi à la place des musées dans la ville et dans la culture de la ville. Donc, c'est sûr que c'est une thématique qui nous rejoint beaucoup. Par ailleurs, je tiens à mentionner que l'Université d'été CÉLAT-MCQ est fière de s'associer à l'École d'architecture pour la présentation de cette édition des Instantanés. Mentionner qu'il existe plusieurs formules d'Université d'été, mais cette formule, elle est assez particulière et originale et, j'oserais dire, unique au Québec, en ce qu'elle est le fruit d'un partenariat vraiment inédit entre, d'une part, une université, le Centre interuniversitaire d'études sur les lettres, les arts et les traditions, et d'autre part, une institution muséale, les musées de la civilisation. Alors que ce soit le programme scientifique, l'animation de l'université en tant que telle, le choix de la formule pédagogique ou encore les terrains, les travaux de recherche qu'on propose aux étudiants à chaque année, cela témoigne vraiment d'une collaboration très étroite entre, d'une part, les professeurs et chercheurs d'un centre de recherche et, d'autre part, des professionnels de musées. Et ce qui nous permet de proposer une programmation qui allie vraiment théorie et pratique et branchée sur des thèmes d'actualité patrimoniale, muséale, culturelle et urbanistique. Je me tais ici, ce n'est pas moi que vous êtes venu écouter. Je vais tout de suite céder la parole à Madame Francine Saillant, qui est directrice du CELAT, collègue et avec qui on travaille depuis maintenant bientôt 3 ans.
Bonsoir, ça me fait très plaisir de m'associer au Musée de la civilisation et à l'École d'architecture pour cet événement effectivement exceptionnel. Je suis là un peu pour vous parler de la collaboration, elle aussi exceptionnelle, que nous avons avec le Musée de la civilisation à travers le travail des écoles d'été qui a été amorcé en 2012 et qui se poursuit, comme je vais vous en parler un petit peu. Alors, on a eu une première édition en 2012 qui portait sur le thème des nouveaux patrimoines et des musées et qui rassemblait à ce moment-là des chercheurs, des praticiens, des spécialistes du patrimoine ethnologique, en archéologie, en muséologie bien sûr, en plus d'experts des nouvelles technologies. Et la deuxième année, en 2013, donc ce que nous venons de vivre, ce fut une édition dirigée par Philippe Dubé, qui est avec nous ce soir et qui sera tout à l'heure dans la table ronde, et qui se consacrait aux nombreux ajustements que les musées et les autres institutions gardiennes du patrimoine doivent faire pour se maintenir en première ligne des acteurs culturels. Alors, c'est vraiment à ce moment-là qu'est née l'idée d'une table ronde sur l'architecture, celle que nous allons avoir aujourd'hui, et idée qui n'aurait pas pu voir le jour sans vraiment cette équipe formidable des Instantanés de l'École d'architecture. Et aussi avec, bien sûr, l'événement particulier qui est ce 25e anniversaire du Musée de la civilisation qui se poursuit tout au long de l'année. Donc, on a souhaité à ce moment-là faire un événement spécial et j'espère que vous en serez absolument ravis de tout cela. La thématique sur l'architecture, mais plus généralement sur le patrimoine urbain et la relation entre le musée et la ville, qui est présentée ce soir, nous intéresse au plus haut point. Et imaginez donc, c'est quand même un petit fil conducteur que nous trouvons fort intéressant, nous sommes fiers de lancer maintenant cette future 3e édition de notre université d'été sur le thème « Ville et musée ». Nouveaux enjeux territoriaux, qui aura lieu donc en mai 2014 et qui proposera une rencontre inédite entre la vision muséologique de la ville et la vision urbanistique du musée. Alors, à ce moment-là, je pense que ce sera une troisième édition, encore une fois, formidable pour la relation que l'université entretient avec le musée, que le CELAT entretient avec le musée de la civilisation. Je vous souhaite une très, très bonne soirée et voilà.
Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Je suis Giampiero Moretti, directeur de l'école d'architecture. Et je suis particulièrement honoré aujourd'hui d'être parmi vous à cette occasion spéciale qui voit la convergence de la série de conférences de l'école d'architecture et la célébration du 25e anniversaire du musée de la civilisation. Cette institution est un pilier de la vie culturelle au Québec et son édifice est depuis sa construction un point de référence contemporain dans le paysage patrimonial de la ville de Québec. Le musée de la civilisation et l'école d'architecture de l'université Laval ont uni leurs efforts pour accueillir Monsieur Moshe Safdie, le concepteur de ce magnifique espace dans lequel nous nous trouvons. Moshe Safdie est architecte, urbaniste, enseignant, théoricien et auteur. Né à Haïfa, en Israël, en 1938, il déménage au Canada avec sa famille en 1953. Il est diplômé de l'université McGill en 1961. Après avoir parfait son apprentissage auprès de Louis Kahn, un très grand architecte, Safdie revient à Montréal pour superviser le plan directeur de l'exposition universelle de 1967. Au cours de sa longue et prolifique carrière, Safdie a réalisé des projets dans le monde entier et parmi ses réalisations marquantes, nous pouvons citer clairement le début de sa carrière avec le magnifique édifice de Habitat 67, la réalisation de sa thèse à McGill, qu'il a lancée sur la scène internationale. Et cette réalisation-là est dans les livres de l'histoire d'architecture. On peut compter aussi le musée Yad Vashem de l'Holocauste à Jérusalem. Au Canada, parmi d'autres réalisations, on peut remarquer le musée de la civilisation de Québec, dans lequel on est, le musée des beaux-arts du Canada à Ottawa et le musée des beaux-arts de Montréal. Moshe Safdie est aussi théoricien et enseignant. Il a notamment enseigné, entre autres, à l'université McGill et entre 1978 et 1984, il a été directeur du programme en design urbain à la Harvard University. Les architectures de Moshe Safdie sont caractérisées par leur intégration au contexte et génératrices d'espaces publics. Pour cette sensibilité aux besoins et aux aspirations des communautés, Moshe Safdie a reçu de nombreuses reconnaissances et prix tout le long de sa carrière. L'événement de ce soir est prévu en deux parties, donc on va avoir la conférence de M. Safdie et à la suite il suivra un débat animé par M. Philippe Barrière, architecte et professeur à l'école d'architecture de l'université Laval, avec la participation de Madame Marie-Chantal Croft, architecte, et de Monsieur Philippe Dubé, professeur en muséologie à l'université Laval. Donc, sans plus tarder, je laisse la parole à Monsieur Moshe Safdie.
Merci. It's a great honor for me to be here to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Quebec Musée de la Civilisation. I regret that since I've been working for the last few decades in architecture in English, I will have to deliver this lecture tonight also in English. My apologies. This museum holds a very special place in my heart. It is the first building I built in Canada after Habitat 67. It is the first museum I ever designed. It was a major turning point in my practice as an architect. It was in the early 1980s when Claude Belzile, a Quebec architect, came to visit me. I had then gone to Harvard to teach, and he said, there's going to be a competition for the Musée de la Civilisation. Will you join us? I looked at the maps, I looked at the location, and I thought, Musée de la Civilisation, Quebec, I will join you. We won, and the rest, I guess, is history. 25 years is a long time in the life of an architect, and much has happened since we built this building. There have been two trajectories in my practice. One begins with habitat. It's about housing, it's about urbanism, it's about mega-density, it's about humanizing mega-density. This has been something I have pursued systematically, and I'll touch on it briefly tonight. The other evolved out of the design of Museum of Civilization. And it led to my designing many other cultural buildings after Quebec, museums, libraries, which turned out to be in many different locations, many different cultures, and in a sense, it became a laboratory for trying to understand how to make an architecture which belongs. So I think I want to include one more interlude or episode in my own career, which was very important in terms of coming to Quebec to design the museum. In the early 1970s, I went back to Jerusalem. I had not been there for 19 years after coming to Canada, and I began working on several projects of rebuilding the city, mostly in the old historic walled city. And I realized for the first time the problem of a modern architect building in a place with a rich architectural heritage. How to make a contemporary building, a modern building which is authentic and yet belongs to its historic setting. The work in the old city involved building next to some of the great monuments of 2,000-year history. And I realized that there has to be a dialogue between the architectural and cultural context and a contemporary building. So when I came back to Quebec to work on this building, I had this experience. I knew that I had to create a building that was quintessentially Quebecois, a building that felt and belonged in the city, that you could not put it anywhere else, that it is part of the urban setting and the tradition and become part of the fabric as if, so to speak, it's always been there. But I want to diverge a moment before going to the projects and go back to a question that a journalist asked me recently in an interview. She asked me, what is the common denominator between all your different projects? What connects them? What makes them part of the same oeuvre? And I think that I would begin by saying that there is a set of principles of, I believe as an architect, an ethic, I would say, that guides my work no matter where it is. The first, I would say, principle is that architecture is material. It is tectonic. Architecture is not painting, it is not sculpture. It is built with real materials, and the expressiveness of structure, of construction, is the language of architecture. We invent architecture out of an understanding of the technology of construction. It is the richest element that we can introduce to the language of architecture. If we don't do that, we have stage set, we have Disneyland. Then it becomes more of an experience, but not architecture. I think the second is that architecture is a social art. It has a purpose. Every building has a program. If you have a school, it has to be a wonderful place for teaching and learning. A hospital has to be a wonderful place for healing. You cannot make an architecture whose form is not rooted in the purpose of the building. As Kahn used to say, let the building be, Louis Kahn, the great American architect, let the building be what it wants to be. Or I like saying, we must discover the life intended in a building. The third principle, which I already mentioned, is that architecture is rooted in place. But by place, I don't only mean context in terms of climate and the surrounding environment, but the history of a place, the culture of a place, the memory of a place. I like to say that the beginning of design is to discover the secrets of a site. When I talk about this building later, I will talk about how I try to understand the secrets of this site. And the last thing I would mention is that architects must address the problems of the day. And the problems of the day for us now are large-scale, high-density megacities all over the world. It's a little difficult in Quebec City, tranquille, calm, beautiful scale, to talk about mega-scale, but 2 days ago I was in Singapore, and a few days before that I was in Hong Kong. And I promise you is that there are scales and densities that are beyond imagination, and we need to learn how to humanize them. Let me move on. How do I do this? Just press it. So I'm going to briefly begin with habitat and what it led to. What we try to do in Habitat is to show that you could have an apartment building, high-rise, with a quality of life that you might have in a house. We thought of a house with a garden. We thought of economy through prefabrication. We thought that you could actually rectify the conflict between the desire for suburbia and urban living. We were very optimistic. But what's amazing is that looking back, Habitat will be Habitat is 47 years old. It'll be 50 soon. I'm 50 also. Habitat, in a way, is an idea that is waiting yet to be realized, and at the same time, a lot has changed. We never imagined the densities that we're building cities and the size of cities in 1967 that we are experiencing today. And so 2 years ago, in a research fellowship that we have in our office, we decided to revisit Habitat, and with a group of young architects decided to say, how would we do it today to the conditions of today? And what you have here are some of the models we made and collected during that year. And we ended up saying that the question how you would redo Habitat has many different answers. For example, one answer would be, how would you make Habitat cheaper? Because everybody loved living there, but nobody could afford it. So this was an attempt to say, let's simplify. instead of all these complicated boxes, let's do a vertical load-bearing structure which has all the simplicity of construction, but still the gardens and all the facilities and so on of the building. Or we said another alternative is to create at a higher density a kind of undulating membrane of housing, and people could actually design their own house in a space that they receive that has a terrace and an apartment and self-building. We then decided to take the city of New York, downtown Manhattan, and see if we could reproduce the same mix and density of downtown New York in a different way. We took the mix of offices, apartments, and shopping, and we came up with a system which provided the same density. Offices were at the lower level, housing was above, most houses had terraces and gardens, there were pedestrian streets which crossed at various levels with community spaces, and shops at the lower levels. This was the same density as Manhattan. It appeared quite a bit more livable. And what is interesting is that these theoretical projects have now already spun off real projects which are being built. This one in Singapore is middle-income housing. It has community spaces, bridges with community terraces, a lot of private gardens, and we are achieving this now as middle-income housing. In China, in Qingguandao, we are building a complex along the seashore, which is 10 times the density of Habitat in Montreal. It's also middle-income housing. It doesn't have all the features of Habitat, but it goes a long way. And also in China, in Chongqing, who's heard of Chongqing? Who knows about the city of Chongqing? 3 hands. It's the biggest city in the world, 33 million people. Maybe Tokyo is bigger, but that's one city, 33 million people. I never heard of it either till I was invited. And the site is the most important site, the convergence of the Yangtze and the Jieling, where the city was founded. It's called the Emperor's Landing. And we were asked to design a complex of housing and offices and shopping and cultural facilities of 10 million square feet on a very, very limited site. Now under construction, there are 8 towers. There's a podium, the roof of which is a public park. There is a conservatory with public spaces and restaurants. There's hotels at the upper levels, offices, apartments, shops, museums, etc., transportation, of course. And the effort is to try, within that impossible density, to create open space, etc., etc. So I shift now, and I want to speak about first this building and what we were thinking when we designed it, and some of the museums that followed. And the emphasis, of course, is to remember that they're all museums, but they're very different museums, and they're all being built at very different places. And there's a few things I'd like to say that are common to all recent museums. And I learned them beginning with working on this one. Museums are changing their role in society. The museum of the 19th century is an elitist, exclusive, very private place. The museum today, as you can see here, is a populist place. It must appeal to a whole cross of society. It must be an extrovert building that is inviting and draws people into it. It is certainly not exclusive. And it also has a new social role. People get married in museums. I don't know if they have weddings here, but they have weddings almost in every other museum. And all kinds of other social and educational events, so that we must recognize that museums are not what they were. I think also museums have different roles, but they must resonate with the exhibits and collection and purpose for which they are built. A museum of science, a museum of civilization, a museum for art, they're all very different buildings in terms of what they exhibit. And the building has to facilitate the content of what's in them. You cannot separate the two. And for me also, museums challenge us to make the architecture and the exhibits work together. I hate black box museums. I think black box museums are a place where you are detached from life and focused only on exhibitry. It's very good for Disney. They tell you a story. They don't want you to remember that there's a world out there. But to me, a museum exhibit must resonate and be experienced with the architecture. They can reinforce each other. So coming to think of this building, realizing it's in the lower city, you see it from the upper city, it's on the water. What are the elements on this site that could generate a design? And I first thought about how do we make the building connect to the river? Because the river is the lifeline of the history of Quebec. And this building set on the river, I wanted to be like a harbor that connects to the water. There was this wonderful drawing of the Marché de Québec. In fact, it says on it market, not marché, but that's in the old days. And it sits right on the river, and it connects to the river with this grand stairs where the boat would come and people would go up to the market. Very close to the location of this building. And I wanted to root this building in the river the same way. And so this was one of the renderings, that the drawings that we made to show how the building crosses the street. We were told that we will get the property on the other side as well, only a matter of time. And it will root itself, and you can climb from the river right into the building. And you can see here the road, the museum that we are in today, and the extension of this into the water with these grand stairs, and this building connecting under the road to the museum on the other side. And if you go to the basement after, right under these stairs, you'll see a big panel, and I promise you it's designed to be removed, to cross over to the other side for the next phase. So this was one thought, but another thought was that this should be a building you can climb on. So metaphorically speaking, when you climb on this building, you're climbing towards the upper city. Of course, you can't quite get there, but still I wanted to be able to have a building that you could just walk up on, and there's a park on top, and you can look at the city, and there's a tower you can even go and look at the view. I'm not sure the tower is open, but and the other thing that seemed really important is that this building has 5 faces. The faces to the street and the face to the top, because as many people see the building from above as they see it from around, from the street. So this is quite a big building, and yet it's sitting in an environment which is all made up of little houses. And then we learned, of course, that there are a number of houses that we will integrate into the museum as part of the museum. So I wanted to break the massing. Instead of feeling one big mass, I broke it into several smaller pieces, and then tried to develop a, you can see here in cross-section how it is built smaller and smaller pieces with the silhouette of the city above it. And how the stairs coming out of the river continue climbing on the building to the roof of the building, overlooking the view around it. And I was delighted to receive this photograph, I think it was the year 2000, when the roof was celebrated with planting and vegetables and took on a life of its own. But the roofs are also the story of what happens inside. The skylights, which bring light, become the patterning that relates to the many little dormers of the roofs of Quebec. And we made it of copper, and I'm happy to say that for the first time coming back, 25 years later, the copper has gone green. Another important element was to keep the street defined and to weave together new construction with the old houses. And you see here on the back street the Maison Steb and the new additions making a kind of a pattern defining the streets with a courtyard in the center. The National Gallery of Canada, Musée des Beaux-Arts de Canada, came after this building. And it was interesting to reflect that it's a museum of art, unlike this, which is a museum, much broader exhibit material. It also was on a site that was extremely monumental, chosen for political reasons. We had the Musée de la Civilisation in Hull across the river, the Musée des Beaux-Arts on this side of the river, on the Ontario side of the river, and of course Parliament as a centerpiece. And so here was a much more complex issue of the dialogue between Parliament and the National Gallery. And it seemed to me that again was an issue of how to make a contemporary building belong in the Ottawa setting next to the neo-Gothic heritage of the buildings of Parliament. And the Great Hall, which is the ceremonial space, became the counterpoint of the Gothic, neo-Gothic Library of Parliament. But again, here was a statement of extroversion. The plan on the left is Schinkel's plan of the Berlin Museum, which is a typical 19th century concept of the museum. The public space is in the middle, and the galleries surround. And the expression of this building is opaque. There's colonnades and blank walls. The public space is in the middle, hidden. The National Gallery is inverted. The public space is the Great Hall and the Grand Colonnade facing the city. The galleries are inside, wrapped by the public space. So the building is like an open book. Whatever goes on in the building is completely visible from the city. The public space is part of the city, and therefore the building is inviting and open, and the galleries within it are then discovered. It was very controversial, extrovert, introvert. There were two schemes. Eventually this one was chosen. But also it is a national museum that has a program also of official ceremonies. All the dinners of the heads of state occur in that building. And so I created this procession, this grand arcade that goes from the lower part of the site up towards the Great Hall. And when there are official events, they put a red carpet there, and it's as grand as anything in Europe. And then the Great Hall is really an urban room for many, many different activities, concerts, receptions, many, many public events. And finally, the courtyards, which are surrounded by galleries. But again, it was all about light, because I believe that art is best seen with daylight. And this is a two-story museum with galleries above and galleries below. Europe and America above, Canada below. And Jean Boggs said, you want daylight, you're not going to get it unless Canada gets it too. So how do we get light to the lower level? And you see here in this maquette that we propose bringing light through shafts to the lower level, which are lined with mirror. So the light comes in and it bounces. The light down here is 85–90% of the light up there. We made a maquette, we built a mock-up, it seemed to work, and so we built it. This is the lower level, and this is the upper level. And so every gallery in this building has daylight, and it can be controlled as required. One of the next museums I designed also had important heritage and historic connotations. It's the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, which is the oldest museum in the United States, which was started by the merchant marines who brought their treasures from around the world. In a city, this is Old Salem, 100 years ago, very beautiful small scale, even more fragile and small scale than Quebec City. And this town today is still quite well preserved. And the museum to which I was making a major addition was a large program about the same size as this museum. But it was fitting in a neighborhood that was all small houses. And so I decided again to break down the building into small pavilions, which we called house galleries. And we clustered them together with a street that connects everything, a covered street. And like this building that has two entrances and you can walk from either side, this building had two entrances. From either end you could walk through and visit the museum. And I wanted the pavilions to have kind of a little bit of a different personality. I tried to make them different materials, but it seemed strange. Next to it is a very famous cemetery, the Cemetery of the Witches of Salem. So you might know about the history of witch burning in the United States, which happened here, and these are the memorials of the witches. And so this seemed like an appropriate inspiration. The shapes of the tombstones of the witches became the shapes of the roofs of the museum. And you can see how it relates to the scale of the houses around it. But it also had another idea. Since these are individual houses, daylight comes in between them to the galleries below. So this is below and this is above. And again, light everywhere. And that's the public street and the courtyard where many events take place, with a shading system that evokes the memory of the ships that used to come into Salem, the sailboats, to bring the collection of this museum. In 1976, I was still in Montreal. I was asked to design the children's memorial at the Holocaust Museum of Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, to commemorate the 1.5 million, to remember the 1.5 million children who died in the Holocaust. The assignment was to create a small museum that you would visit after the historic museum. And I spent some month in the archives seeing the things relating to children, clothing, letters, heartbreaking material. But I came to the conclusion, after agonizing for many months, that to make a museum with information after you come out of the historic museum would not work. People would be saturated with information. And so I proposed a counter idea. I chose a place on the site that had a cave, and I proposed that you go into that cave and descend underground. And below underground would be an antechamber. The first room would just have pictures, photographs floating there of children who died in the Holocaust. But then you would come into a larger underground space where in the center is a memorial candle, one candle. And by an arrangement of glass walls, this candle reflects into infinity. And there are millions of candles around you. And you walk on a bridge surrounded by the candles. The voice reads the names and the age and place of birth of the children. The voice goes on for weeks without repeating. And then you come out at the other end of the mountain to light and to life. The committee rejected the design. They said people will misunderstand. The children in the school buses will think it's a discotheque. And it was put away. In 1986, a man and his wife, who lost their 2-year-old son in Auschwitz, came to visit Yad Vashem and saw the maquette. It was still there. And they were moved and they wrote a check. With the check, it got built. So 1986, it was built. And then some years later, when I was on one of my visits to Jerusalem, I was called by the Foreign Office saying that the Prime Minister of Punjab, the Sikh state in India, is on an official visit. Heads of state are taken to Yad Vashem. He was taken to the Children's Memorial, and he was very touched, and he wanted to meet the architect. So I went to the hotel and I met him, and he said, we Sikhs have had a 500-year history. We've suffered a great deal. We've been persecuted. Now we have emerged in the state of Punjab. We're all over the world. We want to build a museum of the history of our people. Please come and design it. And you can imagine that we architects don't get work very easily. We have competitions. We have first phase competition, second phase competition. It goes on. And here someone says, come design a building for us. So I was very skeptical. But in 2 weeks, 2 weeks later, I was in India. They took me to see the Golden Temple in Amritsar, which is the holiest place for the Sikhs. Beautiful temple with its holiest place set in the middle in water. And then they took me to a town in the other side of Punjab, which is also sacred and has a temple in it. It's where the last guru wrote the scriptures, the Khalsa, and the site that I ended up choosing, actually they had another site, but the site that I ended up choosing are the two hills and the valley abutting right next to the village center or town center. And again the question was, how do you make a building which the Sikhs will feel is their building? It's not enough for me to think it's a Sikh building. They have to feel this is a building that belongs to their heritage. And there was a lot of controversy, you can imagine, of the Prime Minister importing an architect, Canadian, Israeli, American, who knows nothing about Sikhism, and I knew not much about Sikhism, to do the building. And I was given many scholars to brief me and teach me, and traveled. These are some of the first sketches I made after my first trip to the site. And on top is my memory of the fort city of Jaisalmer in Rajasthan. And I was thinking of the building, really remembering the fortress tradition of the Sikhs. They built fortresses everywhere because they were defending themselves. And I thought the building could rise out of the sand dunes very much in that same tradition, but also in a joyous way, not in a defensive way. This was the maquette I took with me to India, showing the historic museum on one side of the hill, the auditorium, library, and changing exhibition next to the town and temple, connected by a pedestrian bridge and with a series of water gardens in the valley, which is in the Sikh tradition of creating gardens with water in their temples. But this is a secular building, not a religious building. I went back to my office and we started drawing, and we were working for a few months on the details. I went back and for more meetings, but the bridge was already constructed. So they were a step ahead of us. And for the groundbreaking, 500,000 people showed up from all the towns and villages of Punjab. And I tell you that simply to emphasize what an important place this has in the life, cultural life and national life of the Sikh community. This is the building as completed 3 years ago. It took 10 years. You see the water gardens. You see the roofs made of stainless steel reflecting light towards the town. The structures themselves are concrete covered with sandstone from the mountains of Gwalior. The story of Sikh history unfolds on 2 levels. Then you cross the pedestrian bridge to the other parts of the museum. The restaurants are by the water. They call this our flower building. And you see the Himalaya, the foothill of the Himalayas in the background. We taught them to make good concrete work, as you can see, and looking from above and at night. And when you come from the mountainside, it's almost like a fortress. You see nothing but the stone walls, as if protecting the city. And when you enter the building, the exhibits, the people, and the architecture become like one, seamless. And seen here from the sacred buildings across the valley, which are part of the town. Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, then decided, I'm giving you that in sequence, to completely rebuild the historic museum that was built in 1953. They decided because Washington became the more comprehensive museum on Holocaust and all the new information that came out of the ex-Soviet Union, and because they now had 3 million people a year, not 300,000, that they needed to rebuild it completely. Not like Punjab, they decided they have to have a competition, international competition. They invited first 20 and then 5 and then 3. And finally, we won the competition and were able to go forward. This shows you the site before we started. The historic museum is behind these trees, the older historic museum, and the memorial hall. The new museum would be 3 times the size. And I felt I did not want to make a big building on top of this mountain, which is beautiful, treed, pastoral hill. And I also did not feel that to tell the story of the Holocaust, you can have architecture which is business as usual. I didn't think you could have a building with windows and doors and nice materials, and I thought it should be almost like a quarry or like something archaeological. And I started thinking of cutting the building through the mountain, under. You come into the mountain one side, and you come out, as you can see in that sketch, from the other. So that the museum, the galleries, the exhibits are below the mountain, in the mountain. You only have entry and exit at the 2 ends. And one inspiration was a photograph of this stone quarry in Spain, which is dug into the rock, very much like the galleries that I proposed, with light coming from above, sort of washing down and making you feel how deep in the earth you are. And so here you see the building as it was constructed. It comes in the mountain one side, it exits the other. The little squares you see are skylights that are bringing light into the galleries below. The square on the corner is the old memorial hall which we preserved and kept. And you see in plan, you come from a reception building, you cross over a bridge, you enter, and as you come through, these cuts in the floor force you to go from chapter to chapter. So you have to follow the narrative. You have no escape. You see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you can't get to it till you went through the entire story. The building is concrete, for which I had to get special permission, because you have, in Jerusalem, you need to build in Jerusalem stone, which I felt was too pretty and too colorful. I thought black and white photographs tell the story, and gray concrete is the place to have them. So you come in to a reception building. I want to tell you a story about symbolism in architecture. Many architects like to tell the public what symbolic meaning their architecture has, just in case you miss the point. I actually don't like telling any of it because I think it's very subjective. But I made here a soft light coming through this trellis, so the sunlight breaks into the shadow pattern of stripes. And one day I visit Yad Vashem and I see a busload of visitors with a guide, and he says to them, the architect wanted you to feel like the prisoners. He made these skylights so you would be striped on your thing like the uniform in the camps, so you would identify with the prisoners. I thought that's a good story. I never thought of it, but... So you cross the bridge, you enter, you start moving through, but then the floor has exhibits that interrupt you. You cannot get through. And you start moving in from chapter to chapter. And at some point, the visitors and the exhibits and the photographs all become one continuous experience. You see here a survivor looking at photographs of the prisoners as when the camps were liberated. And again, this visitor at the photograph of the entrance to Auschwitz. It terminates at the Hall of Names, which is where the records of all the known names are kept. 3 million names are in the files around the space. Photographs of these are applied to the cone that reaches to the light, and a 3-story deep cone is cut into the natural bedrock, which is a place of memory for those whose names will never be known. Looking up and looking down, you have the rock going into the water table and the reflection of the photographs from above in that water. And then, at the conclusion, you come back to light and to the fact that life prevailed. We have prevailed. There's an optimistic conclusion when you look at the forest of the hills of Jerusalem. Very controversial discussion whether it was appropriate for an architect to conclude optimistically the Holocaust Memorial Museum, but eventually this was approved as the thing to do. I will conclude with 2 very contrasting projects. One, a museum of art science and a project that we designed in Singapore. The project itself, Marina Bay Sands, is a facility focused on tourism, hotels, convention center, 2 theaters, shopping, and a cultural facility on the promontory. And we decided to do something Singapore didn't have. Singapore has art museums, it has science museums, it has good concert hall, it has aquariums, you name it. So our invention was a museum of art science, one word. A museum that brings together the arts and the sciences, that shows the connection between them. And that is the building that's on the tip and I will not take you through the project which we worked on for 4 years and built in 4 years, except to just show you a bit the idea of the Sky Park, 2.5 acres on the roof, 59th floor, with jogging paths and gardens, and the world's longest swimming pool. But the museum itself, by definition, had to be the symbol of Singapore looking to the future. And there was a lot invested in it being something that becomes the symbol of the city. Interesting discussion. Is this a lotus? Is it the hand of welcome? Or less flatteringly, as the client once said to me, it's only a bunch of bananas. But you see in section, the Singaporeans call it the lotus though. You can see in section, some of the galleries are in the upper structure with light coming from above, very dramatic spaces. They lend themselves to a variety of exhibitions, as I saw today how many galleries in this building have been adapted. And for more traditional exhibits, there's the podium itself, which is set into the ground. And in the center is an open courtyard, and all the rain that falls on this big dish drains through the center and is collected and used for irrigating the gardens. But I want to tell you something about the evolution of geometry here. The shape itself began as being quite a free shape, and after we won this and had to build it, we tried to rationalize it mathematically to make it, as I said before, inherently buildable. We tried first to make it out of spherical geometry, which did not work well, and then we embraced the geometry of a toroid, which is a squished sphere, which still has all the pieces on it regular so that they could be easily manufactured. And each of these produced one of the fingers in the galleries, and then we could tweak the geometry so that slightly different radius would give these each their own identity. And this is what came out from the computers as we did that, which felt a little tight, and so we changed a little bit the mathematics and it became more relaxed. So you can see that once you're working with computers, you can refine the construction as well as the detailing, and this goes directly to the manufacturer to produce the steel frame and to produce the various pieces that make up the building. This is the centerpiece where it's all connected through with the rain coming through the center, and just a glimpse of the galleries with the light coming from above. This is during construction and when they were finished, and with some of the exhibits inside them. The last project is again a museum in Bentonville, Arkansas. The birthplace of Walmart. Its claim to fame. I was approached by the daughter of the founder of Walmart, Alice Walton. This museum opened last year, so this must have been about 7 or 8 years ago. After visiting many museums by different architects, she just chose her architect. I went to see her one day. At the end of the day, I said, how are you going to start choosing an architect? What are you going to do? I thought competition or this or that. She said, I ended it tonight. So we started work. This is the family estate next to downtown Bentonville. But I think you should be careful not to get too much fantasy about the word downtown Bentonville. It's a bit like a scene from a Western movie with a little square and the little store that was the first Walmart, 5 and 10 Walmart in the square. But we walked the site. Everybody expected we would build on top of the hill, very nice views. But I felt we should not cut the trees, which were very mature, and build inside the valley, right where the water is. You see here it's hard to see the topography, but the valley is going right through there, and the hills coming down into it. And of course, the first question is, what about the floods? What about the water? How you protect the art, etc. This is the stream called Crystal Springs on a normal day. After 2 or 3 days of rain, you better be out of where this picture is taken. It becomes a fierce stream of water. I propose that we create 2 dams. Each would hold the water at slightly different level, 2 ponds. And around these 2 ponds, you see them here in the topography, you would then build a series of pavilions so that the ponds become the heart of the museum. The water is moving right through the middle. The buildings that cross are, the base of the building is a dam, and the building itself is a bridge. So they're sort of the dam bridges, with the galleries surrounding. So this is the plan, and you can move all around from pavilion to pavilion, and that's the building as realized. You enter from the top of the hill, or you come down the trails, and then you start moving, and you see here the base of the building is the dam that's holding the water, and the roof is spanning from one side of the water to the other. There are 2 buttresses, they're cables, real cables, like a suspension bridge, and the entire building is built with wood harvested in Arkansas around the site. It's all pine from the local woods. So below, over the dam are different galleries. Above them is the containing bridge, and the wood beams are arching from cable to cable. And that's the mock-ups we made to test the idea of how we use wood in a very refined technology of laminated beams to form these structures. And the concrete walls, at the places where they're tied down, are inlaid with wood. So you have a combination of concrete with wood set into the concrete. So you enter from above, and you descend from the tower into the courtyard, and then you move around. The first structure is a social space, restaurant, celebration place, and then you start moving around the pond. That's still that social space, moving around, and the first gallery, and then you come around, you see the water coming right through under the building, another bridge building with galleries. You see the container of the gallery. When you come in, it has the most beautiful, soft, even light that is extraordinary in terms of seeing the paintings, no shadows whatsoever. Coming around again, contemporary galleries, and so on and so forth, always connecting to nature. So this was a museum about experiencing art with nature, that you are seeing nature as you see the art. You're never contained, you're never in a gallery for very long before you see nature around you. It's quite extraordinary to experience. This is a collection of American art, and see the collection next to the landscape interwoven in this way. I'd like to say a couple of words in conclusion. I'm often asked, it's a very favorite journalist question, what inspires you as an architect? And the expectation is that I would have a list of buildings or architects that inspired me, or buildings that I love. And in fact, I would do that, but I would probably begin by saying, if I have to talk about buildings, I would talk about vernacular architecture. I would talk about the towns of Italy and the villages of Iran and the places where I really learned how architecture was made, even not by architects, but just by people building through evolution. But what really inspires me is design of nature, by nature. This is the wing of a bird, the bone structure. It is maximum strength with minimum weight. It is an amazing lattice, extraordinarily beautiful, but just a matter of rigidity and strength. Nautilus shell, the only way the geometry could work for the animal and the house to grow together. Or if you think of the transformation of a tree between the seasons, adapting to the weather. Imagine an architecture that changed from winter to summer as these trees do. I noticed driving by that the new thing in Quebec is to have a plastic garage over your driveway. That's a transformation, but we could be more innovative about it. And you know, what could be more beautiful and provocative than the cobweb, which is strength, lightness, and the whole pattern is the way the spider weaves it from point to point, which then follows a logarithmic spiral. Very extraordinarily beautiful, but it's beauty that comes out of fitness. And I'm using the word fitness in its Darwinian sense of evolution. Fitness in the sense of responding to the survival of the organism, an evolution that has to do with survival. So there is, I think, a link between beauty and fitness. I wrote a poem, I think it was 82, just as we started designing this museum, in a book I wrote, Form and Purpose, about this, and I'd like to read it today because I think it sums up my thoughts then and today. He who seeks truth shall find beauty. He who seeks beauty shall find vanity. He who seeks order shall find gratification. He who seeks gratification shall be disappointed. He who considers himself the servant of his fellow beings shall find the joy of self-expression. He who seeks self-expression shall fall into the pit of arrogance. Arrogance is incompatible with nature. Through nature, the nature of the universe and the nature of man, we shall seek truth. If we seek truth, we shall find beauty. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Please. We would like to thank you very much. And we take this very important moment to ask you if you want to ask a question. I think it would be nice if you could answer some question. So if some of you have some questions, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to speak in English for a while. Ou je traduirai. Any questions? Please.
Thank you for the great talk. You presented us the museum as a public space connected with the city, like for this museum, the one in Ottawa. And just before that, you presented like your project of mega densities, and which repose on a big block, completely separated from the city. And I was wondering which connections you're trying to make with those big buildings that seems to live out of themselves, like independent little cities, completely separate from the existing fabric. And
can I have this back? Yeah. Are you asking what connects the large-scale architecture with the small-scale institutions?
No. Like when you when you design those mega densities buildings, like in China or the kind of, how do you try to connect them with the existing fabric, with the existing city?
Well, the big question in these densities is it inevitable? Because you could argue that these densities are artificial. They are hyped up by the desire of everybody to be in the same place and the planning authorities which permit it. You could say, why not have lower density? Why not impose lower density? I think the economic forces of the desire to be one on top of the other, both businesses and even people, because that's where the jobs are and so on, are so powerful that no government dares intervene. It doesn't matter if it's the all-powerful government of China or the impotent government of the United States. Either case, they cannot, the United States can't stop sprawl, and the government of China can't stop this enormous concentration. So we as architects, I think, have to act within the reality of what's happening. And I think there is a wide range of possibilities that we can intervene to make things more humane, better exposure to light, more sunlight, better connection with nature. The problem is that if you look at the magazines of architecture, it's all about towers. Everybody's trying to get it higher and bigger. That's nothing new about that, but still. But the emphasis is not about livability or light or any of that. It's about formal forms and shapes. I think we need to redefine. If we're going to build these tall, many buildings, one on top of the other, light and air and connectivity and all that have to be the priority of the agenda, not whether this is twisting this way or it's twisting that way, which is almost irrelevant to the problem at hand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your inspiring talk. You first started by talking about architecture as tectonic, as a material, an arrangement of material in construction. Then you showed us all these great examples of museums where light was a prime concern. How do you see light as a material for construction?
To me, light is one of the great generators of design. And it's not contradicting the materiality of architecture. I think there are many ways of light. And to start with, I feel like if I have to work a whole day in a meeting room, which has no windows, which happens too much, I feel sick at the end. I mean, I don't know what the weather is outside. I cannot see. If I have to work in an office, which is in the middle of a building, which is 100 feet away from the next window, I don't think that's humane. So you think of light in a poetic way, the light in a church, the light in a museum, but I also think of light as a sustaining way. Light that you need in your house, light that you need in your room, light that you need in your workspace. When I design a museum, I like to say everybody working in this museum, except in the dark room, has a window. You know, the idea that you make a wonderful museum full of light for the public and then put all the people working in the museum in the basements without light is a contradiction. I worked on the superconducting super collider in Texas for many years. It wasn't built at the end, the big tunnel. There were 3,000 scientists for whom we were going to build a new campus, but temporarily they were in a big Sears warehouse in little cubicles, 3,000 people with not one window. And all these great scientists who were brought from all over the world were submitting themselves to living without light and working there for a couple of years. It's, to me, incomprehensible. So light is the source of life for plants and for people, and we need to really not compromise that.
One last question from the audience, because we have a table ronde after that.
Moshe.
Hello.
How are you? Je vais parler en français. Je vais faire un souhait ce soir. Depuis une décennie, les Québécois ont voulu s'approprier les rives du Saint-Laurent. La Commission de la capitale en tête a demandé à ce qu'on puisse se rapprocher le plus possible du fleuve. Je te confierai que la phase 2 du musée de la civilisation était peut-être ce qui a provoqué le plus cet élan-là. Est-ce qu'on peut faire le souhait ce soir? Malheureusement, M. Côté a dû nous quitter. mais à ses collègues qui sont ici parmi nous de procéder dès demain à la construction de la phase 2 du musée.
Je suis d'accord.
I'm very pleased to be here tonight, and I should say that it's the prolongation of the summer school that we had last May, and this school was about I translate, the social part of the museum. Mm-hmm. So all week long, we tried to understand what is the social part of a museum. And you were part of that discussion, even if you weren't there. And tonight you brought a lot of ideas that is very interesting for us. And I want to thank you for this great conference. I have to say first that I'm a museologist, teaching museology. And I would start with this evidence, which expressed the idea that the museum as a machine, and I like to think about the museum as a machine, is a complex one. More than that, beyond that complexity, there's some sort of a strong contradiction in the museum itself. As we could see in French, we say musée, and it expresses in some ways that contradiction, being a masculine word, but having an E, a feminine E at the end. So that gives you an idea of how complex and contradictory is the museum. My point is that museum at first, and you mentioned it at the beginning of your conference, referring to the 19th century museum, that the museum is a black box in some ways, in extreme ways, and a conservatory for objects. So it's, by its function, the museum has to be that machine that conserves. In the same time, the same museum has to receive public, like tonight, which is very disturbing for objects. And I wonder how the architect, as you are, and you showed us many examples tonight, how do you live with this contradiction, which is not a minor one? To me, it's really major, and every time when I see new projects, I'm quite astonished how architects deal with that contradiction, being in the same time this space to protect objects, and at the same time to receive all sorts of public. So that's some sort of a first reflection that we... Right, exactly. And I don't know if you got a few words to say.
I think you're absolutely right that there's a conflict between the archival conservation role of any museum and the exposition to the public of the material. It's a contradiction. And at the same time, I feel there's a bit extreme positions about this. If we look back in history, the same paintings today we go crazy if the instrument shows 53% humidity, not 47, and we go crazy, this is impossible. These were shown in palaces and churches without air conditioning, with windows open, with the sun coming in, and everybody was relaxed about it, and nobody got excited. And, you know, many of these masterpieces spent hundreds of years like that.
True.
So I think we've gone from one extreme to the other. Today, the conservation voice in the museum is often oblivion to the mission of showing the work and experiencing the work. Because you can control light. I mean, let's start with the easy part, paintings and sculpture and so on. Light can be controlled, but it's better to have it than not have it at all. Yet almost every museum I've designed, when I come back 2-3 years later, all the skylights shut down. Here too.
Right.
Why? Because it's easier. You don't think about it. You don't need to think about it. But if the conservators and the curators are more integrated in their mission, you will find a balance. It's a balancing act. Architects need to design buildings that can allow you to balance. Many architects don't care. They either have too much light or no light. But if you design a machine which is adjustable, like the iris of the eye, more light, less light, then there can be a balancing act. And I think what's missing in museums today is a greater integration of the mission between the conservator and the curator. And the curator should not be so extreme in their conservatory concerns. It's just a little too extreme, I think. But what do you think?
Well, as I hear you, it's some sort of a compromise. You're talking about balance. I think it's
Life
the right
is a
word.
compromise.
Pardon me? Life is a compromise. Right. And museum has to be too, of course. And it's a matter, in fact, of extreme. But in the same time, well, I think it's a non-ending battle. And it always be. And even in the team or the staff of the museum, curators are on one extreme, and of course the, as we say today, mediators or educators are on the other side with the public and so on. So I think there's no end. And thank you for your bringing some thoughts about it. Thank you.
In the same way, one of my concerns is the urban animation that can be provided by the museum. And in addition of the museum exhibit, because generally we go in the museum because there is an exhibit, not necessarily because the museum is drawn to get entered in. And I would like to know from you how the architecture, for example, of this museum can contribute to the appropriation of the lieu, of the neighborhood, and can contribute to the urban city and the urban design.
I think that's a very good question, because I think that buildings can be designed to induce you to move through them, and buildings can become designed to be part of a neighborhood. And for me, this was the beginning. I was envisaging that people would come along the river and they'd be able to come in the museum, but they could also come on the streets of the city and come into the museum. And in the first sketches, I was thinking these two entrances almost connected like a street, that this becomes part of the street. Later on, there were concerns, security, this and that, so it's not quite a street. But if you think of a museum in a neighborhood or in part of a city, and you have multiple ways in, and multiple views in, and maybe you take your path, you're going, like, if you think of Milan, the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele, if you want to go from the Piazza della Scala to the Duomo, you have to go through there. think of it as a museum. All of a sudden, people are just moving through it because this is a connection in the city. So I think there are many devices to do that. And also there will be the conflict, same conflict. Security and public need. The Peabody Essex Museum, which I showed, was built over a real municipal street. It's as if we would have taken St. Pierre and put a glass roof. The museum promised that you could walk through to the waterfront from the city without buying a ticket. And then they would have a separate system. If you want to go in the galleries, they would take tickets. I thought, this is my first walk-through museum. Then there was 9/11, good excuse, security, they closed down one side. You can only come and you can't walk through the building. So the struggle is there, but I think the more we can make the buildings open and public and you can move through them, the better. Because people will come in and they'll come in to do things. In libraries, we've achieved that better. In Vancouver, the urban room open, out of the control, no security, you can come in, and then you can go in the library. But in museums, it's a bit more
difficult. Yeah.
There is another thing. There is another theme which I think is very important in a museum, is the memory. And it seemed that it's a theme that you dealt very well with, especially with two museums in a very, very strong way. The one in the Holocaust Museum, because memory belongs to everybody at the same time, to the conservation part and to the public part, and it is something which is shared. So, and it seems that this museum is one of your strongest in many ways. And in the CELAT Museum, there is also a clin d'œil to the memory through the cemetery, in a sense. And that was extremely beautiful in many ways, because museums are linked to death in many ways. So how do you bring, and confront all those contradictions, to go back to Philippe Dubé notion of contradiction, which is memory and actuality, death and life. And of course, you mentioned previously that life was about compromise. I would like you to explain, the kind of, as Corbusier says, in a building, there must be something magic. And I think that architecture is part of, the magic must be in the compromise. I would like you to talk about it.
I love the word magic, and I use it myself often, because I say, after you've done everything, and you explained everything, and you've rationalized everything, there still remains one question: is the magic there? So, but the magic is the big dilemma. I mean, how do you achieve that? I think that the issue of memory raises a delicate point, and I will talk about it in the light of criticism, which I often receive as a critique. I think that buildings that deal with culture, whether it's a issue of history and memory, or whether it is art, or whether it is education of science, any buildings that deals with that can be a narrative. The building can be thought of as a narrative. And I enjoy thinking about it as a narrative. It helps me. It's a kind of a... I'm thinking of, they say, the Sikhs, and I think, the whole culture is about defense, and, somehow this spins off. And the interesting thing is that when I do this, the public at large recognizes it, and they respond to it.
And there's an identification too, which is very strong.
Absolutely. But the architectural critics hate it. So in Yad Vashem, which I think is maybe one of my, very important moments as an architect. The leading critic of the newspaper said he Disneyfied the Holocaust. And, Disneyfied the Holocaust. And when the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Ottawa opened, what was her name? Adele Friedman? She was a critic of the Globe. She said, this is all kitsch. It has nothing to do with what an art museum should be like. So by now I have, my skin is very tough, but I can speak about it because it's interesting that very often I find a contradiction between what the public seems to appreciate and what the critics are looking for. And it fascinates me, this contradiction between the critic and the public
But
at large.
as a theoretician, you must know how to answer to the critics.
I don't bother. I mean, I don't know how to answer them because I don't know what the premise is. What do I say to the critic who says he Disneyfied the Holocaust? Well, we think that Disney is no good, so it's an insult, but Disney is not bad either. So, how would you answer her? He's Disneyfied the Holocaust.
I will displace the debate to other things.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
Well, I think it is time. They told me that we had 25 minutes. And by the way, I would like, if you want to share the conversation with us, I think it's time to you. We have one last question, and it is for you. We have to close the debate very soon. So, Georges, would you like to ask a question?
Well, I want to know what did you want to do with water down here, the nice water stuff, and why was it closed? I'm sorry.
Okay.
My name is Georges Tessot. I teach at Laval. I'm a critic, and I'm a bad historian. Just a curiosity. I just want to know what happened with ice, the water. I think you have to.
If you open the tap, it'll pour, okay? When we were doing the excavation for the building, we discovered the old seawall. We were very excited because it meant that the river was here. And all this is landfill.
Right.
And this was where the river started. So I thought that's extraordinary. First we must leave it open. That's the river wall. And how will you know that it's the river? You put water on the other side. But there was also an art program, public art. And there was a competition of artists. And I had one vote on the committee. There were 6 members. I had one vote. In Singapore, it was easier. I had a big budget, and there was one person committee, and it was me, and I had the vote. Here, I had 1 out of 6. This proposal for iceberg was made at the time. I didn't think it did what the building needed. I respect the artist and her work and the fact that maybe some other place ice was the right thing to do. This city has so much ice in winter, it doesn't need artificial ice. But my vote was overruled. So the ice came, the water went. But the stone wall is still here. And maybe one day, if we connect back to the river, where we have the place to build the other side, we can also put the water back in here as part of the story.
But also one of the main reasons why the water was removed because of the to conserve for conservatory conservation
water, humidity
and the smell.
So
yeah,
this is
humidity.
For you, humidity.
Out of balance. Out of balance.
We would like to thank you very much for this extraordinary event. We would like also to thank the Museum of Civilisation. Merci, Martin. And thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much. It was
and
a
once
great
again,
privilege
my
to have you tonight.
apologies for not doing this in French.
It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.